Have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you? Not just embarrassed, not just criticized, but truly deeply humiliated in front of people who were watching, judging, waiting to see if you would break. I have. And the worst part is, the person who did it wasn't a stranger. She was someone I had no choice but to see every single day. Someone I couldn't escape. Someone who held power over every breath I took, every moment of sleep I tried to steal, every hope I had of surviving with any shred of dignity left. Her name was Denise. And before she became the one person in this world I trust most, she was the one person I hated more than anyone I'd ever known. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June of 2018 when she grabbed me by the collar in front of 63 women in the dining hall at Riverside Correctional Facility and told me I was nothing, that I would always be nothing, that I deserved everything that happened to me. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough that the guards didn't even pretend not to notice. And when I tried to pull away, when I tried to stand up for myself, she hit me, hard, right across the face. And nobody stopped her, because in that place she was someone, and I was nobody. But before I tell you why that moment changed everything, before I explain how the woman who broke me became the woman who saved me, let me take you back. Because you can't understand what it means to lose everything unless you remember what it felt like to have something, anything, even if it was small. I grew up in a town called Millbrook, about 40 minutes outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. My mother worked at the textile mill for 22 years, standing on concrete floors for 10-hour shifts, breathing in cotton dust that eventually settled into her lungs like snow that never melted. My father left when I was 7. I remember the day because it was my birthday and he promised me a cake. He never came back with it. My mother never talked about him after that. She just worked, and worked, and worked. And I learned early that love was something you earned by being quiet, by not asking for too much, by making yourself small enough that people didn't mind keeping you around. I got pregnant at 19. His name was Marcus. He was 26, worked construction, had a smile that made you feel like maybe the world was in as hard as everyone said it was. But then the smile faded. Then came the anger. Then came the nights when I learned that silence wasn't just something I practiced, it was something I perfected. Because if I stayed quiet, if I didn't argue, if I just nodded and agreed and disappeared into the walls, maybe he wouldn't hurt me as badly. Maybe he'd just yell. Maybe he'd just throw something. Maybe I'd wake up the next morning and he'd apologize and I could pretend it never happened. I had a daughter, Lily. Born on a cold morning in February of 2012, weighing 6 pounds and 4 ounces, with eyes so dark they looked like they could see through everything I was trying to hide. She was perfect, and I was terrified, because I knew what it meant to be a woman who stayed quiet, and I didn't want that for her. But I didn't know how to be anything else. Marcus got worse. The drinking got worse. The violence got worse. And one night when Lily was 3 years old, when she was sleeping in the room next to ours with her little stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, Marcus came home drunk and angry, and I knew something was different. I knew that this time, staying quiet wouldn't be enough, so I didn't stay quiet. I fought back. And when he grabbed me, when he slammed me against the kitchen counter, when I felt my ribs crack under the weight of his fists, I grabbed the only thing I could reach. A kitchen knife. And I didn't think. I just moved. I didn't kill him. But I hurt him. Badly enough that the neighbors called the police. Badly enough that when they arrived, they saw him bleeding on the floor, and me standing there with a knife in my hand and a little girl crying in the doorway. And even though I tried to explain, even though I showed them the bruises that covered my arms and my back and my neck, even though I begged them to understand that I was just trying to survive, they didn't care, because all they saw was a woman with a weapon and a man on the ground. And in their eyes, that made me the criminal. I was sentenced to 8 years for aggravated assault. 8 years. Lily was sent to live with my mother, who was already dying from the cotton dust in her lungs, already too tired to raise another child. And I was sent to Riverside, where the walls were painted the color of old bruises, where the air smelled like ammonia and desperation, where every woman you met had a story that sounded too much like your own, and where I met Denise. She'd been there for 6 years already when I arrived, serving a 12-year sentence for drug trafficking, though everyone whispered she'd been set up by someone she trusted. someone who walked free while she took the fall. She was 41 years old, tall, with shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of the whole world, and a voice that could cut through steel. She ran the kitchen crew. She decided who ate first, who got the good trays, who had to settle for the leftovers that had been sitting out too long. And from the moment I walked into that facility, she decided she didn't like me. I don't know why. Maybe because I was younger. Maybe because I kept my head down and didn't talk much, and that made her think I was weak. Maybe because she saw something in me that reminded her of someone she hated. Or maybe because in a place like that, you need someone to be beneath you just so you can remember you're still someone. Whatever the reason, she made my life hell. She gave me the worst jobs. Scrubbing toilets, mopping floors that never seemed to get clean. Sorting through garbage in the kitchen while the other women got to cook, to prep, to do something that felt almost human. She made comments, loud ones, about how I looked, about how I walked, about how I probably deserved everything that happened to me. And I stayed quiet. Because that's what I knew how to do. I stayed quiet and I kept my head down, and I told myself that if I could just survive, if I could just make it through each day without breaking, then maybe I'd see Lily again. Maybe I'd hold her again. Maybe she'd still remember what my voice sounded like. But that Tuesday in June, something in me snapped. We were standing in the dining hall, and Denise was handing out trays, and when she got to me, she held mine back. She looked at me with this smile, this cold, cruel smile, and she said, "You think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? Walking around here like you're some kind of victim, like you didn't do exactly what they said you did." And I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I'd just gotten a letter from my mother saying that Lily had stopped asking about me, that she'd stopped saying my name, that maybe it was better if I just let her forget. Whatever it was, I looked Denise in the eyes and I said, "At least I fought for someone I loved. What did you fight for?" That's when she grabbed me. That's when she pulled me close and told me I was nothing. That's when she hit me. And that's when I hit her back. We fought right there in the middle of the dining hall. 63 women watching, some cheering, some silent, some just staring like they were watching their own lives play out in front of them. We fought until the guards pulled us apart, until they dragged us both to solitary confinement, until we were locked in separate cells with nothing but concrete walls and our own thoughts and the sound of our own breathing echoing back at us. I spent 7 days in solitary. 7 days with no windows, no clock, no way to tell if it was morning or night, or if time even existed anymore. 7 days replaying that moment over and over, wondering if I'd just thrown away any chance I had of seeing Lily again. 7 days hating Denise, and 7 days hating myself even more. But something happened in that silence, something I didn't expect. I started thinking about what she'd said. About me thinking I was better than everyone else. And I realized she was right. Not because I actually thought I was better, but because I'd been walking around that place like I didn't belong there, like I was different, like my story was somehow more tragic, more justified, more deserving of sympathy. And in doing that, I'd made myself separate. I'd made myself alone. And in a place like Riverside, being alone was the most dangerous thing you could be. When they let me out, I didn't see Denise for 3 days. And then one morning, I was standing in line for breakfast, and she walked up behind me. I felt my whole body tense. I waited for her to say something cruel. I waited for her to threaten me. But instead, she just stood there. And then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, she said, "I'm sorry." I turned around. And for the first time since I'd met her, I really looked at her. Not at the person who'd humiliated me. Not at the person who'd hit me. But at the woman standing in front of me. And I saw it. The exhaustion. The pain. The same silence I'd been carrying my whole life, reflected back at me in her eyes. "I'm sorry too," I said. And that was it. No big speech. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two women who'd spent so long being angry at the world that they'd forgotten how to be anything else. And slowly, carefully, we started to become something that neither of us expected. We started to become friends. Denise told me her story, How she'd grown up in Detroit, how her mother had died when she was 12. How she'd been passed around from relative to relative until she aged out of the system at 18, with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a diploma that meant nothing. How she'd met a man who promised to take care of her, who got her involved in moving packages she didn't ask questions about, who disappeared the moment the police showed up. How she'd taken the fall because she didn't know any better. How she'd lost her son in the process. A little boy named Cameron, who was 9 years old when she went to prison, who was being raised by a grandmother who told him his mother was dead, because it was easier than explaining the truth. And I told her mine, about Marcus, about Lily, about the way I'd learned to make myself small because I thought that's what love required, about the guilt that sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable, every time I thought about my daughter growing up without me. We started working together in the kitchen. Denise taught me how to cook with the limited ingredients we had, how to make something that tasted almost like home out of canned vegetables and dried pasta and spices we weren't supposed to have, but somehow found their way into our hands. We talked about our kids, about what we'd say to them if we ever got the chance, about whether they'd forgive us, about whether we'd forgive ourselves. And slowly, something shifted. The other women noticed. They started coming to us when they had problems, when someone was being bullied, when someone needed help writing a letter, when someone just needed to be reminded that they were still human, still worth something, still capable of being more than the worst thing they'd ever done. Denise and I became a team. We became a unit. We became the thing that neither of us had ever really had before. We became family. My mother died in the spring of 2021. I got the news in a letter from a social worker I'd never met. She'd been gone for 3 days before anyone thought to tell me. Lily was 9 years old, and she was alone. The social worker said they were looking for placement. That may be a foster family. That may be someone who could give her stability. And I felt my entire world collapse. Because I knew what the system did to little girls. I knew because I'd seen it happen to Denise. I knew because I'd heard the stories from dozens of women at Riverside. And I knew that if Lily went into foster care, I might never find her again. Denise sat with me that night. We weren't allowed to be in each other's cells, but she bribed a guard with cigarettes and sat on the floor next to my bunk and held my hand while I cried. And she said something I'll never forget. She said, "When we get out of here, we're going to find her, both of us, and we're going to make sure she knows she's loved. I promise you that." I didn't believe her. How could I? We were both still years away from release. Denise had 4 more years, I had 2. And even if we both got out, what could we possibly do? 2 ex-convicts with no money, no resources, no power. How could we possibly find one little girl in a system designed to swallow people whole? But Denise meant it. And over the next 2 years, she made me believe it too. She started planning, writing letters to legal aid organizations, researching how to navigate the foster care system, connecting with other women who'd been released and finding out what resources were available on the outside. She made me promise that the moment I got out, I wouldn't give up, that I'd fight, that I'd do whatever it took to find Lily. And I promised. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. I was released on a Thursday morning in August of 2023. I walked out of Riverside with $47 in my pocket, a bag of clothes that didn't fit anymore, and a phone number Denise had made me memorize. It belonged to a woman named Teresa who ran a halfway house in Charlotte, who'd been in prison herself once, who understood what it meant to try to rebuild a life from nothing. Teresa picked me up at the gate. She was 56 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a braid and a smile that felt like sunlight. She drove me to the halfway house, showed me to a room with a twin bed and a window that actually opened, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. And then she handed me a folder. Inside was every piece of information she'd been able to gather about Lily, where she'd been placed, what school she was attending, what caseworker was assigned to her, and a letter from Denise, telling me not to give up, telling me she'd be out soon, telling me to start the fight now because every day mattered. So I did. I got a job washing dishes at a diner 6 blocks from the halfway house. I saved every penny. I met with the caseworker who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, who told me that my daughter was doing fine without me, that it would be traumatic to reintroduce me into her life, that maybe I should consider what was best for her instead of what was best for me. I met with a lawyer from legal aid who told me my chances were slim, that my record made me ineligible for custody, that even visitation would be difficult. But I kept fighting. Because I'd promised Denise, and because I'd promised myself. Denise was released 14 months later, in October of 2024. I was waiting at the gate when she walked out, and the first thing she said to me was, "Did you find her?" And I said, "Not yet, but I'm close." And she said, "Good, then let's finish this." Denise moved into the halfway house. She got a job at a grocery store stocking shelves at night. And together, we kept fighting. We went to court hearings. We met with social workers. We attended parenting classes we didn't need just to prove we were serious. We saved money for a lawyer who actually believed we had a chance. And slowly, impossibly, things started to change. The judge assigned to our case was a woman named Patricia Hammond. She was 63 years old, had been on the bench for 27 years, and had a reputation for being tough but fair. She looked at our case. She looked at my record. She looked at the letters from Teresa, from my employer, from Denise, from 3 other women at the halfway house who wrote about how hard I'd worked, how much I'd changed, how determined I was to be the mother Lily deserved. And she said something I'll never forget. She said, "The system isn't designed to give people second chances, but maybe it should be." She granted me supervised visitation, 1 hour a week, in a room with cameras and a social worker watching every move. And on a Saturday morning in January of 2025, I saw my daughter for the first time in 7 years. She was 10 years old. She had her hair in 2 braids. She was wearing a purple jacket and sneakers that lit up when she walked. And when she saw me, she didn't run to me. She didn't smile. She just stood there, staring, like she was trying to remember who I was, like she was trying to decide if I was real. I sat down across from her, and I didn't try to hug her. I didn't try to apologize. I just said, "Hi, Lily. My name is Sarah, and I'm your mom, and I know you don't remember me, but I remember you, and I've thought about you every single day since I've been gone. And I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She didn't say anything for a long time. And then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, she said, "You left me." And I said, "I did. And I'm so sorry. But I didn't want to. And I fought to come back. And I'm going to keep fighting, because you deserve a mother who fights for you." It took months. Months of weekly visits. Months of Lily slowly starting to talk to me, to trust me, to let me back in. Months of Denise sitting in the waiting room every single week, reminding me that I wasn't doing this alone. And in April of this year, Judge Hammond made her final ruling. She granted me custody. Not full custody. Not yet. But joint custody with the foster family Lily had been living with, which meant I could take her home on weekends, which meant I could start being her mother again. The first night Lily stayed with me at the halfway house, Denise cooked dinner. Spaghetti with garlic bread and a salad made from vegetables we'd grown in the tiny garden behind the building. And the 4 of us sat around the table, Teresa and Denise and Lily and me, and we ate together like we were a family. Because we were. Not the family I'd imagined when I was 19 and thought love meant staying quiet, but the family I'd built from the wreckage of everything I'd lost. Lily asked me about Denise, about how we knew each other, and I didn't lie to her. I told her we met in prison. I told her we fought. I told her we became friends, and I told her that Denise was the reason I never gave up, that she was the reason I kept fighting, that she was the reason I was sitting here now, holding Lily's hand across the table. And Lily looked at Denise. And she said, "Thank you for helping my mom." And Denise, this woman who'd spent 6 years in prison, who'd lost her own son, who'd learned to be hard because the world didn't give her any other choice, started to cry. And she said, "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep helping." I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Lily will ever fully forgive me. I don't know if Denise will ever find her son, if Cameron will ever want to know the mother he thinks is dead. I don't know if we'll ever stop being labeled as ex-convicts, if we'll ever be able to move past the worst things we've ever done. But I do know this. I know that the woman I hated more than anyone in the world became the woman I love most. I know that the fight that nearly destroyed me became the beginning of the thing that saved me. And I know that dignity doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting back up, from refusing to stay down, from finding someone who will stand with you even when the whole world is against you. Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when the person you thought was your enemy becomes the person you can't imagine living without? Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to tell you matters. Because the truth is, we all carry humiliation. We all carry shame. We all carry moments we wish we could erase. But we also carry the possibility of redemption. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that lets us breathe again. The kind that lets us look at ourselves in the mirror and see someone worth fighting for. Share this with someone who would understand. Someone who knows what it means to lose everything and still find a reason to keep going. Because stories like these, they remind us that we're not alone, that we're not defined by the worst thing we've ever done, that there's always a way back, even when the path seems impossible. Denise and I still live at the halfway house. We're saving money to get our own place, something small, something where Lily can have her own room and Denise can have a space to finally breathe. We work during the week. We cook dinner together every night. We help other women who come through Teresa's doors, women who look at us like we're proof that survival is possible. And every Saturday, Lily comes over, and we're building something, slowly, carefully, something that looks like family. Last week, Lily asked me if she could call Denise Aunt Denise, and I looked at Denise and she was crying again and she nodded, and Lily smiled. And for the first time since I held her as a baby, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. Respect doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo the pain. It doesn't magically heal the wounds that years of violence and silence and incarceration leave behind. But it does something else. It teaches us how to stand again, how to look at the person we were and the person we are and accept that both are true, how to forgive ourselves not because we deserve it, but because holding on to hate, even hate for ourselves, only keeps us trapped. The woman I fought in prison became my only friend on the outside. And in doing so, she taught me what real strength looks like. Not the kind that demands silence, not the kind that survives by making yourself small, but the kind that stands tall even when the world tries to break you. The kind that reaches out even when you've been hurt. The kind that says, I see you, I know you, and I'm not going anywhere. And if stories like this remind you what dignity feels like, subscribe. You belong here, and don't miss the next story. It is something truly unforgettable.